My name is Noah Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and I live by myself on a small, worn-down farm just beyond the edge of Ashford, Pennsylvania. My closest neighbor sits a solid 20-minute drive away, and that arrangement suits me just fine. The land once belonged to my grandfather, then passed to my father, and now it carries my name. It isn't the sort of farm you'd find printed on a postcard. The wooden fences have started to rot in spots. The old horse barn springs leaks whenever the rain comes down heavy, and the apple orchard hasn't seen a proper pruning in years. Out behind the barn, in the small paddock, I keep a handful of rescued horses, creatures that nobody else had any use for. I repair what breaks, I feed them, and I do my best not to dwell on things too long. 3 years back, I walked away from a steady engineering job in Pittsburgh after my father died of a heart attack. I returned here because the place needed someone, and that someone had to be me. A year after that, my fiancée Hannah was killed in a car accident while she was driving out to see me. Ever since then, I've kept my eyes lowered and my hands occupied. My mornings begin before the sun. Feed the horses, inspect the fences, walk the rows of the orchard. My evenings close out the very same way. A simple dinner, a cup of black coffee out on the front porch, and the sound of the wind drifting through the trees. I don't complain about it. I don't bring up the past. I just keep moving forward. That night, the rain poured down without mercy. It had been gathering strength all afternoon, and by 10 o'clock, the wind was beating against the side of the house, and the thunder was rolling low and slow across the open fields. I had only just finished looking in on the horses when the sound reached me. 3 faint knocks at the main gate. At first, I figured it was nothing more than a branch. Then it came once more, gentler this time, almost uncertain. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into it. The rain struck me at once, cold and sharp against my skin. When I made it to the gate and shined the beam through the iron bars, I saw her standing there. She looked to be around 24, maybe 25, drenched all the way through, her dark hair stuck flat against her face, a thin jacket clinging to her shoulders, her old sneakers thick with mud. One of her hands held tight to a small canvas bag, while the other gripped the gatepost as though she'd collapse the moment she let go. There was a fresh bruise on her left wrist, purple and angry against her pale skin. Her eyes found mine, tired, wary, and oddly calm, as if she had already made peace with whatever was coming next. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice rough from the cold. "I just need a little water. Then, I'll be on my way." I looked at that wrist again. The bruise wasn't brand new, but it wasn't old either. "You're standing in the middle of nowhere in the middle of a storm," I told her. "Water isn't the only thing you need right now." She shook her head fast. "I don't want to be any trouble. Trouble's already here. You're 8 miles from town, and it's nearly midnight." She held my gaze for a long while, the rain streaming down her face. I took one slow step backwards so she wouldn't feel trapped. "My name's Noah. I live out here on my own. There's hot water, clean towels, and a couch. You can sit in the kitchen, drink something warm, and figure out what you want to do after that. Nobody's going to lay a hand on you here." She didn't move at first. Then, at last, she stepped through the gate. Her name was Rosie Alvarez. I found that out after I'd brought her inside, handed her a thick towel and one of my flannel shirts, and set a glass of water on the kitchen table. She sat with both hands curled around the glass, like she expected someone might come along and snatch it from her. She drank in small, cautious sips. Even though it was plain she was parched, I leaned back against the counter. "You walked here from Route 17? She nodded, never lifting her eyes. "That's better than 10 miles. I didn't ask her why. A weak whinny drifted out from the barn. The young foal I'd taken in 3 days earlier had been running a low fever the whole day. I'd thought he was on the mend, but that sound told a different story. I rose to my feet at once. Rosie raised her head. "A foal?" I stopped. "You know horses?" "A little." She pushed her chair back and trailed after me out into the rain without another word. Beneath the yellow glow of the barn light, the foal lay curled in the straw, his breathing quick and shallow. Rosie lowered herself down slowly, not reaching for him at first, just letting him catch the scent of her hand. Then she took the milk bottle I'd been using, warmed it in a bucket of hot water, and settled down low so she was nearly eye to eye with him. She spoke in a soft, even murmur that I couldn't quite make out. 10 minutes later, the foal was drinking. I stood there watching her, rainwater still dripping from my hair, and felt something turn over in my chest. This girl, who had turned up at my gate looking like she'd been chased through hell itself, was now soothing a sick animal with nothing more than patience and a pair of quiet hands. When the foal finally settled, Rosie got to her feet. Her face was pale with exhaustion. "Thank you," she said. "I should go now." I looked out the door. The rain hadn't eased up. The wind was still wailing. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" She didn't answer. I drew in a breath. "You can stay the night. The living room couch is comfortable. The door has a lock. You can use it from the inside if that makes you feel safer. Come morning, if you still want to leave, I'll drive you down to the bus station." She studied me for a long stretch. The rain pounded against the barn roof above us. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Then she nodded. Just once. And that was how Rosie Alvarez came to spend her first night at Bennett Farm. I woke at 5. The way I always did. The sky outside my bedroom window was still dark. For a few seconds I lay there, listening to the rain tap against the roof, half wondering whether the night before had been a dream. Then I remembered the girl on the couch, and the way she'd looked at me when she gave that single nod. I got dressed and headed for the kitchen, half expecting the living room to be empty. But when I came through the doorway, Rosie was already up. She stood at the sink in my flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up, washing the 2 glasses we'd used the night before. Her hair was pulled back into a loose knot, still damp at the ends. On the stove, a pot of coffee was just beginning to perk. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard me. "I didn't know how you take it," she said softly. "So, I made it black. I drink it black, and then I got lucky." The corner of my mouth lifted before I could stop it. It was the first time in days I had smiled without having to force it. She finished drying the glasses and set them down on the counter. "I'll head out after breakfast. I don't want to overstay my welcome." I nodded, but something in my chest pulled tight at the idea. All right. We ate in near silence, scrambled eggs and toast that I threw together. Rosie kept her eyes down on her plate, but I noticed the way she sat. Back straight, always turned slightly toward the door, like someone who had learned to keep track of the exits. When we'd finished, she stood and carried her plate to the sink. "Thank you for last night, and for the clothes." "You're welcome." She lingered at the door, her bag already in her hand. "I can walk to the main road. Someone will pick me up." Before I could say anything, a weak, pitiful whinny floated in from the barn, the same sound from the night before. I set my coffee down and grabbed my jacket. Rosie paused with her hand on the doorknob. "The foal?" "Yeah. He was better yesterday." She looked toward the barn, then back at me. "If you don't mind, I could stay a few more hours, just until he settles." I studied her face. She wasn't offering out of politeness. There was real worry in her eyes. "All right," I said, "a few hours." Those few hours stretched into the rest of the day. By late afternoon, the foal was steady again, and Rosie had somehow reorganized the entire medicine cabinet in the tack room without anyone asking her to. She moved with a quiet efficiency, taking temperatures, labeling bottles, even sweeping the aisle between the stalls. I watched her from the doorway and felt something strange settle inside my chest. Something that wasn't quite peace, but wasn't loneliness either. She stayed that night too. And the night after that. By the 4th day, I stopped acting surprised when I found her in the kitchen every morning making coffee. She'd started feeding the horses before I even made it outside. She knew which one liked his grain mixed with a touch of molasses, and which one needed a soft word before you could slip the halter on. It was as though she'd been living here for months, instead of days. I didn't ask about her past, not because I wasn't curious, but because I saw the way she flinched every time a car rolled by on the dirt road, the way she always placed herself so she could see the front door from wherever she happened to be working, the way she kept that small canvas bag within arm's reach at all times, like she needed to be ready to bolt at any second. I knew that kind of fear. I'd carried it myself after Hannah died. On the 6th day, while we were patching up a stretch of fence in the back pasture, I finally said the thing that had been sitting on my mind. "I could use some help around here," I told her. "Real help. I can't pay much, but there's a room at the end of the hall, 3 meals a day, and I'll give you something every Friday if you want it." Rosie stopped hammering and looked at me. The wind dragged a strand of hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "No, I don't." "Then why would you trust me with your home?" I thought about the way she'd calmed that foal the first night, the way she spoke to the older rescue horses like they were old friends, the way the house had started to feel less empty from the moment she'd begun moving through it. I saw how you treated something weaker than you when nobody asked you to, I said. That tells me more than any resume ever could. She looked down at the fence post, standing between us. For a long while she said nothing. Then, very quietly, I'll stay, but I want to earn it. I don't want to feel like I'm taking charity. Fair enough. That evening we ate bean soup at the kitchen table while the rain fell softly outside. It was the first real conversation we'd had that wasn't about work or the animals. This place used to be happier, didn't it? She asked, stirring her spoon slowly. I set my own spoon down. Yeah. Before someone died, I met her eyes. She wasn't prying. She was just seeing the house for what it really was. My fiancée, I said. Hannah. 3 years ago. Rosie nodded once. She didn't reach for any of the usual hollow phrases. No. Oh. I'm so sorry. Followed by some story about how time heals everything. She simply let it sit there. I'm sorry, she said at last, and that was all. We finished our soup in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It felt like the kind of quiet that settles between two people who have both lost something and don't need to explain it to each other. Later that night, after she'd gone off to her room, the small one at the end of the hall that used to be storage, I stood out on the front porch with my coffee and listened to the rain. For the first time in years, the house behind me didn't feel like somewhere I was merely surviving. It felt like a place someone might actually want to stay, and that scared me more than I cared to admit. 2 weeks after Rosie officially started working at the farm, I drove her into Ashford to pick up feed, vet supplies, and a few sets of work clothes that actually fit her. It was a clear morning, the kind that made the hills look gentler than they really were. Rosie sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the fields roll past. She hadn't said much since we'd left the farm, but I noticed how her fingers kept tracing the edge of her seatbelt, like she was reminding herself it was still there. Ashford was a small town. Too small. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business before they'd even finished their morning coffee. I should have known better than to bring her along. We stopped at the feed store first, then the hardware store. By the time we got to the grocery store on Main Street, I could already feel the eyes tracking us. Mrs. Allison behind the counter smiled a little too wide when she spotted Rosie. Noah Bennett, she said, ringing up the groceries. And who's this lovely young lady? Family? She works at the farm, I answered. Mrs. Allison's smile didn't slip, but her eyes turned sharp. Works at the farm. I see. Rosie didn't flinch. She simply met the woman's gaze and said evenly, I take care of the horses. We left without another word, but I knew the damage was already done. By the end of the day, half the town would be talking about the strange girl living out at the widowed Bennett boys' place. Rosie stayed quiet the whole drive home. I didn't press her. 3 days later, the past she'd been running from finally caught up with her. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the barn checking the foal's leg when I heard the low rumble of an engine coming up the dirt road. Rosie was out scattering hay in the paddock. The instant she heard the sound, her whole body went rigid. She dropped the bucket and took 2 steps back until her shoulders hit the barn wall. Rosie? She didn't answer. Her face had drained of color. A black SUV pulled up in front of the barn. 2 men climbed out. One was somewhere in his early 40s, wearing an expensive leather jacket and the kind of watch that cost more than my truck. The other was younger, broad through the shoulders, clearly there as muscle. The older man surveyed the farm like he was appraising it for sale and finding it wanting. Rosalina Alvarez, he called out, his voice smooth and cold. Rosie didn't move. I stepped out of the barn and put myself between them. Who are you? The man's eyes flicked over me with mild distaste. Grant Whitlock. She used to work for me at my estate down in Virginia. She left in the middle of the night. Took things that didn't belong to her. Rosie's voice came from behind me, barely above a whisper. I didn't take anything. Grant smiled without a trace of warmth. You took my time, my money, my patience. Where I come from, that counts as theft. I felt the heat rise in my chest. She's not going anywhere with you. Grant tilted his head. And who exactly are you supposed to be? The man who owns this land. He let out a single laugh, short and ugly. Cute. Listen, kid, I don't know what sob story she fed you, but Rosalina has a habit of making men feel like heroes. It never lasts. She'll run from you the same way she ran from me. I didn't step back. She's not running from me. Behind me, Rosie's fingers curled into the back of my shirt. Just two small points of pressure, but they steadied something inside me. Grant's smile vanished. He took one step closer. Get in the car, Rosalina. I'm willing to forget this whole little episode if you come along quietly. I shook my head. She's not going anywhere. The younger man started forward. I didn't move. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees and the foals shifting restlessly in his stall. Finally, Grant let out a slow breath and smiled again, colder this time. She's going to ruin your life, Bennett. Girls like her always do. You think you're saving her, but she'll destroy you the same way she tried to destroy me. He turned and walked back to the SUV. Before getting in, he looked over his shoulder one last time. This isn't over. The vehicle disappeared down the road in a cloud of red dust. Rosie slid down the barn wall until she was sitting on the ground, her arms wrapped around her knees. I crouched down in front of her. You okay? She laughed, but there was no humor anywhere in it. No. But I'm used to it. I hated that answer. That night, after the sun had gone down and the house had grown quiet, Rosie told me everything. We sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea that had long since gone cold. At first, she kept her sleeves pulled down over her wrists. Then, halfway through the story, she pushed them up. The scars were faint, but there was no mistaking them. Thin white lines and older purple marks where someone had gripped her too hard, too many times. She had worked at Whitlock Equestrian Estate for nearly 2 years. In the beginning, it was only the horses. Grooming, feeding, exercising. Grant had been charming at the start. Then the demands began. Longer hours, extra chores around the main house, cooking for his guests, cleaning up after parties that ran until 3 in the morning. He stopped paying her on time. Then he stopped paying her altogether, claiming he was holding back her wages to cover damages she had supposedly caused. When she tried to leave the first time, he took her passport and her driver's license, told her she'd never survive without him, that nobody else would hire a girl with no papers and no references. The night she ran, Grant had been drinking. He cornered her after a dinner party and tried to drag her into one of the guest rooms. She fought him off, grabbed whatever she could carry, and ran. She hitchhiked, slept in gas stations, and walked for days until she reached my gate. When she finished, the kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I didn't know what to say. Everything I wanted to tell her felt too small. Finally, I reached across the table and rested my hand near hers, not quite touching. No one is taking you away from here unless you want to go. Rosie looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were dry, but something in them had cracked open. You don't know what he's capable of. Maybe not, but I know what I'm capable of. What's that? I'll stand at the door. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. She didn't make a sound, just sat there, while the tears fell onto the table between us. I didn't pull her into my arms right away. I didn't want to frighten her. I simply set a clean napkin close to her hand. After a minute, Rosie reached out and took my hand instead. Her fingers were cold. I covered them with my other hand and held on. In that moment, whatever had been growing between us stopped being just gratitude or kindness. It became something neither of us had words for yet, but we both felt it. Grant didn't waste any time. 3 days after he left the farm, a thick envelope showed up in the mail. Inside were legal papers, formal accusations that Rosie had stolen jewelry from a guest at his estate and broken her employment contract. There was also a request for the local police to bring her in for questioning. The language was cold and precise, the kind of paperwork built to scare people into silence. Rosie read the papers at the kitchen table, her face growing paler with every line. When she finished, she folded them carefully and set them down like they might go off. I have to go, she said. I was standing at the counter, pouring coffee. I stopped mid-pour. No, you don't. Noah. He's not going to stop. He'll drag you into this. He'll make your life hell just because you helped me. I can't let that happen. I turned to face her. You think if you leave, I'll feel better? At least you won't be his target. Rosie. I set the coffee pot down harder than I'd meant to. From the moment you knocked on my gate, I was already in this. You don't get to decide for me now. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. Then she whispered, "Why? Why are you doing all this for me?" The question hung in the air between us. I could have handed her the easy answers. I didn't want to see someone get hurt. It was the right thing to do. I couldn't turn my back. But none of those felt true anymore. I walked to the back door and opened it. The sky hung heavy with clouds. A storm was coming. I stepped out onto the porch and waited. After a few seconds, Rosie followed. We stood side by side, watching the wind move through the apple trees. "I wake up every morning now, and the house doesn't feel empty," I said quietly. "Because you're in the kitchen making coffee. Because I can hear you talking to the horses like they understand every word. Because for the first time in 3 years, I actually want to fix more than just broken fences and leaking roofs. I want to fix the parts of my life I gave up on." Rosie's breath caught. "I care about you," I went on. "Not like someone I'm saving. Like someone I don't want to lose." She turned her face away, but I saw the tears fall anyway. "I don't even know if I have anything left to give anyone. You don't have to prove you're good enough to be loved." That broke her. Rosie covered her face with both hands and sobbed. Quiet. Shaking sobs that seemed to rise up from somewhere deep and old. I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around her. She clung to me like she was afraid the wind might carry her off. I held her tighter as the first drops of rain began to fall. We stood out there in the rain for a long time. No words. Just the sound of the storm and her breathing against my chest. It wasn't a kiss. It was something heavier. Something that mattered more. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, at the county courthouse in Lancaster. I hired a lawyer named Maya Chen, who came highly recommended. She was sharp, no nonsense, and didn't sugarcoat a single thing. "Whitlock isn't just trying to get her back," Maya told us after going through everything. "He's trying to destroy her credibility so she'll never speak against him again." Rosie almost didn't go. The morning of the hearing, she stood in the hallway with her backpack, staring at the front door like it was the edge of a cliff. "I can still leave," she said. "You don't have to do this." I picked up my keys. "I'm not asking you to stay for me. I'm asking you to stay for yourself. But I'll be right there either way." She looked at me for a long while. Then she set the bag down. The courtroom was colder than I'd expected. Grant sat at the plaintiff's table in a tailored suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. His lawyer was expensive. Rosie sat beside Maya, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. I sat directly behind her. When it was her turn to speak, Rosie stood up. Her voice shook at first, then it steadied. She told the truth. She told them about the long hours, the unpaid wages, the passport he'd taken, the bruises the night he tried to force her into a room. She didn't cry. She just spoke until there was nothing left to say. Grant's lawyer tried to paint her as unstable, ungrateful, a thief. But then Maya called our final witness, June Miller, a woman who had worked at Whitlock's estate 6 months before Rosie. June walked in, sat down, and told almost the exact same story. Control, threats, stolen documents, fear. The room went silent. When the judge ruled in our favor, dismissing all the charges and referring Grant's conduct to the proper authorities for investigation, Rosie didn't react right away. She just sat there, staring down at her hands. Outside on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun felt too bright after the dim courtroom. Rosie stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, the wind pulling at her hair. Then she turned to me. "I'm free," she said, like she was testing the words. "Aren't I?" I nodded. "Yeah, you're free." Her face crumpled. This time the tears came freely, without shame and without fear. I pulled her into my arms, right there on the courthouse steps, while people walked past us. She buried her face in my shoulder and cried until she had nothing left. For the first time since I'd met her, Rosie Alvarez wasn't running. And for the first time in 3 years, neither was I. After the hearing, Rosie didn't leave. She stayed. But this time it was different. She opened her own bank account, got her documents back, and signed a real employment contract with weekly pay. Every Friday, I handed her an envelope, and she took it without hesitation. She was building something slowly, carefully, on her own terms. One evening in early fall, while we were sitting out on the back porch watching the horses graze, she told me her idea. "I want to start something here," she said. "Not just boarding or trail rides. Something for people who've been through things. People who don't know how to trust anymore. We could offer slow rides, grooming sessions, quiet time with the horses. No pressure, just presence. I looked at her. Healing rides? She nodded. Some people can't talk about what happened to them, but they can stand next to a horse and breathe again. I was skeptical at first, but I trusted her. We started small. Just 3 people that first weekend. A veteran who hadn't slept through the night in years, a woman who had left an abusive marriage, a teenager who had stopped speaking after her parents' divorce. Rosie led them with a gentleness I'd never seen before. She didn't push. She simply showed them how to be still. By the end of the month, we had a waiting list. The farm changed. The silence I'd lived in for so long was replaced by voices, laughter, the sound of hooves on soft earth. People came and they left lighter than they'd arrived. Rosie moved through all of it like she had finally found the place she was meant to be. One afternoon in late October, we sat beneath the old apple tree behind the house. Golden leaves drifted down around us. The foal Rosie had saved that first night was now a strong yearling, running clumsy circles in the paddock. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't opened the gate that night? I try not to, I said. I do. Her voice was soft. I think my life would have ended somewhere out on Route 17. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. I would have disappeared. I turned to look at her. You didn't disappear. Because of you. No, I said. I only opened the gate. You're the one who walked through it. Rosie studied my face for a long moment. Then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't born from fear or gratitude or adrenaline. It was slow, certain, and real. The kind of kiss that happens when 2 people have finally stopped running from everything that came before. A year later, we hung a new sign at the entrance to the farm. Bennett and Alvarez Healing Farm. Rosie stood beside me in a denim jacket, the wind tugging at her hair, watching as I drove in the last screw. She looked different from the girl who had stood at my gate in the rain. Stronger, lighter, whole. You sure you want my name on it? She asked. I glanced at her. You think this place still belongs to just me? She smiled. The real one. The one that reached her eyes. That night, we sat out on the front porch after the last visitors had gone. The air smelled like autumn and wood smoke. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. Rosie rested her head on my shoulder, her fingers laced through mine. The night you asked if I wanted to stay, she said quietly. I said yes, because I had nowhere else to go. I waited. Now, she continued, I'm still here because I choose to be. I turned my head and kissed the top of her hair. Below us, the farm stretched out into the darkness. Fences mended, lights glowing in the barn, the old apple tree standing watch. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was alive. I thought about the version of myself who used to sit out here alone every night, trying not to feel anything at all. That man felt like someone I used to know. I looked at Rosie. Want to stay? I asked. She squeezed my hand. Yes, she said. But this time, it's not because I'm afraid to leave. She turned to me, her eyes clear and steady. It's because I finally found the place I want to stay.